She dove into the river to save a drowning child, never expecting him to call her mama. But when the boy turned out to be the millionaire's heir, the woman he rescued recognized her face from a courtroom scandal that destroyed her life. Why did the child know her name, and what truth was buried with it? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Rosa Martinez moved like a ghost through the back corridors of the Vance estate. Quiet, careful, invisible. At 28, she had perfected the art of going unnoticed. Her eyes stayed low, her footsteps silent, her breaths measured. For 2 years now, she'd cleaned bathrooms that gleamed like mirrors and washed linens she could never afford. No one knew she had once been Rosalinda Esparza, a name scorched by a name the Vance family would never forget. The late afternoon sun baked the back terrace as she wheeled out the trash bins, sweat clinging to her neck. The estate stretched behind her in polished glass and stone, a fortress of wealth and secrets. Just beyond the security wall, a winding river manicured to seem wild. No one ever went near it. She was almost done when a sharp sound split the air, a scream, high, frantic, and unmistakably young. Rosa's heart kicked hard. She dropped the trash bag and sprinted toward the sound. At the river's edge, a boy was thrashing, no more than 7 or 8, arms flailing against the current. His head dipped under once, twice, then he screamed again. Dios mío, Rosa gasped. She didn't hesitate. She kicked off her shoes and dove. Water was colder than she expected, muddy and fast. She swam with strong, practiced strokes, closing the distance just as the boy went under again. She plunged, eyes open in the murk, and grabbed fabric, his shirt. Rosa surfaced with him in her arms. "It's okay, baby, I got you," she whispered, paddling hard toward the embankment. By the time she pulled him out and laid him on the grass, the boy's lips were blue. He wasn't breathing. "No, no, no te me emra," she cried, pressing her hands to his chest. She started CPR, mouth-to-mouth compressions again and again. "Come on. Please, God, not like this." Finally, he coughed once, then again, water streaming from his mouth. He gasped, sputtered, then cried out loud. Rosa collapsed beside him, her soaked blouse clinging to her skin, her hands trembling. Security came crashing through the hedges moments later, radios crackling. But it wasn't them the boy reached for, it was her. He wrapped his arms around her neck, shaking, and cried out between sobs, "Mama! Don't let go, Mama!" Rosa froze. The words struck deep, hollowing something in her chest. He clung tighter. She didn't correct him, she just held him as if he were hers. Voices, more footsteps, and then a presence, taller, heavier, colder. "What happened?" demanded a man's voice. Rosa looked up. Caleb Vance. Sharp suit, jaw like stone, eyes that sliced through people like data. One of the most powerful tech moguls in America, and the father of the boy clinging to her like his life depended on it. He stared at Rosa as if struck by lightning. "You?" Rosa's stomach dropped. His voice wasn't one of gratitude, it was recognition. Not of a maid who just saved his son, of something much older. Much darker. More security arrived, then EMTs, swarming like bees. They took Aiden, gently prying him from Rosa's arms. He screamed, reaching for her, but the medics hushed him, ushering him into the ambulance. Click. The camera flash. Reporters. One of them shouted, "Is that the woman who saved him?" Click. Rosa's eyes darted everywhere. The photos, the cameras, his voice still ringing in her ears. She backed away slowly. No one stopped her. Then she ran. Toward the mansion. Not toward her room in the servant quarters. Away? Because Caleb Vance didn't just know her as Rosa the maid. He knew her as Rosalinda Esparza. And if he spoke her name aloud, everything she'd buried would rise again. Rosa's feet pounded against the dirt path behind the estate as she fled, soaked and shivering. Her heart raced not from the cold river, but from fear. She hadn't heard that name, Rosalinda Esparza, spoken aloud in years. Not since the headlines labeled her a thief, not since she'd been dragged through the courts for a fraud she never committed, and not since Caleb Vance's company had testified against her, sealing her fate. She hadn't thought anyone would recognize her. Time, hard labor, and the weight of surviving had changed her face, her body, her voice. But one look from Caleb had cut through it all. He'd seen her. By the time she reached her cousin's garage apartment, where she lived, she was gasping for breath. She slipped inside, bolting the door behind her. The sound of her daughter's crayons scribbling on cheap paper filled the air. "Mama." 8-year-old Bella looked up, wide-eyed. "Why are you all wet?" Rosa crouched beside her, still catching her breath. "I fell," she said gently, "into something I thought I'd left behind." That night, the city buzzed. Local news ran the story of the mysterious maid who saved the son of tech billionaire Caleb Vance. Blurry photos circulated, of Rosa circulated, of the boy like he was her own. But they didn't know who she was, not yet. She hoped Caleb wouldn't say anything. But deep down, she knew hope was a fragile shield. At the hospital, Aiden refused to speak to anyone but the woman who'd pulled him from the river. "Where is Mama?" he kept asking. The doctors tried to explain, but his cries only grew louder. Caleb stood by the glass, watching his son scream for a stranger. A woman he hadn't seen in years. A woman he thought he'd never see again after the trial ended, and her name was scrubbed from polite society. Rosalinda Esparza. He remembered her now. Brilliant, defiant, too clever for her own good. A junior developer at his firm, once set to lead a major project, until everything unraveled. Financial irregularities, missing funds, accusations, and her vanishing act before sentencing. He'd believed the evidence back then. He'd wanted to, because trusting her had once felt dangerous in a way he couldn't afford. But seeing her pull his son from the water, that wasn't a criminal, that wasn't a con artist. That was a mother's instinct in a woman who had nothing to gain. "Find her," Caleb ordered his head of security, quietly. "No police, no press." The man nodded and left. Caleb looked down at Aiden, who was finally sleeping. He hadn't even known Rosa was still in the country, let alone under his own roof. And why had she come back? To spy? To take revenge? Or had she never been guilty in the first place? Back in her apartment, Rosa watched the news with the volume low. She saw the headlines twisting. Unidentified maid saves billionaire's son. Mysterious heroine disappears. Bella slept beside her on the worn-out mattress, unaware of how close they were to losing everything. "Again," Rosa whispered into the dark. "Please, don't let him find me." But the truth was, part of her knew that Caleb already had. And if he decided to speak her real name, Rosalinda Esparza, it wouldn't just be her life unraveling again. It would be Bella's future. And this time, she didn't know if she could protect her daughter from the storm that was coming. Not with lies, not with running, only with the truth she'd buried long ago. And Caleb Vance held the shovel. Once, long before she was Rosa the housemaid, she was Rosalinda Esparza, daughter of a seamstress and a mechanic, the first in her family to set foot inside a university lecture hall. She had earned a full scholarship to study law, contracts, ethics, corporate responsibility. She worked double shifts, tutoring and translating documents to afford textbooks and support her mother's cancer treatment. And when the internship letter came from Vance Enterprises, she cried in her kitchen, clutching the envelope to her chest. It had felt like everything was finally turning. She was placed in the compliance division, working quietly under high-level attorneys, reading employee files, reviewing HR complaints. Most interns weren't trusted with anything sensitive, but Rosalinda's professors had praised her detail-oriented mind. She noticed things others missed. It started with the exit memos. Quiet terminations, pages of non-disclosure agreements, dozens of female engineers let go after raising concerns, officially laid off but always just after maternity leaves or harassment complaints. Rosalinda followed the paper trail, the falsified justifications, the altered timestamps in the internal server. It was systematic. She brought her findings to HR. Within 3 days, her ID card stopped working. By Friday, security escorted her out of the building. Monday morning, she was arrested in her dorm room. Pictures, embezzlement, unauthorized access, and evidence tampering. She remembered how cold the handcuffs felt on her wrists, how the officer had looked at her, not like a person, but like a headline. No one believed her when she said the documents had been planted in her student email, that she'd been framed. Not the university, not her advisor, not the court-appointed lawyer who whispered, "Plead out, honey, you'll get less time." Worse still, someone leaked her arrest to the media, and her scholarship, gone, overnight. So was her student visa. A glitch in paperwork meant she was no longer protected from deportation proceedings. Her mother died a week later, alone. Rosalinda never got to say goodbye. With her name ruined, her life shattered, she disappeared, moved across the state, changed her hair, changed her name. And so, Rosa Martinez was born, a ghost, a shadow of what she could have been. Now, in the present, Rosa sat on the edge of her couch, wiping her damp hands on her jeans. Bella was at school. The TV played faint noise in the background, another segment about Aiden's miraculous rescue. Her face was blurred, but she could feel the attention growing, the walls tightening. The door opened, and Marisol stepped in, carrying a basket of laundry. One look at Rosa's face, and she dropped it. "This is looking for you, isn't he?" Rosa nodded. Marisol sat down heavily. "Then you need to leave. You know what will happen if they dig deep enough." "I'm tired of running," Rosa said softly. Marisol grabbed her wrist. "You think this is strength? Staying? You're not protected here, Rosa. If Caleb Vance tells the right people who you really are." "Saved his son?" Rosa said, voice shaking. "I gave that boy air when he was drowning." "That makes you a hero," Marisol whispered, "but it won't make you safe." Rosa didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew how the world worked. For people like her, truth never came without a price. Rosa barely slept that night. Her dreams were haunted by old courtrooms and the echo of a gavel hitting wood. She woke at dawn, sat by the window in silence, and watched the sunrise over the city like a woman waiting to be judged. She dressed in plain clothes and pulled her hair back tightly. The mirror reflected a version of herself she hadn't seen in years, calm, guarded, quietly afraid. That afternoon, Caleb Vance sat in his office, overlooking the vast campus of Vance Enterprises. His phone buzzed with alerts, articles, photos, speculation. The maid who had saved his son had disappeared without answering a single question. No name, no record, no media interviews. Like a ghost. But Caleb had seen her face. He knew that face. After hours of digging, it came back to him. Rosalinda Esparza. He found an old file, archived and flagged, dismissed for cause. Fraud. A blip in the company's legal history, something he never looked into back then. But now he couldn't stop looking. He stared at the photo, younger, hopeful eyes, a proud smile, the name printed neatly under it. A chill ran through him. He remembered something else, his late wife's journal, the one he hadn't opened in years. She had worked in HR briefly, early in their marriage. He retrieved it from the locked drawer. On page 17, a list of employees she'd been troubled by, ones she believed had been wrongfully treated. And at the top, Rosalinda Esparza, intern, brilliant. Something's wrong here. Caleb leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. If his wife had seen something... And now, this same woman had pulled his son from the river, risked her life, then vanished. He picked up the phone. Find her. 2 hours later, in a tiny apartment in East LA, Rosa heard a knock. Her breath caught. Not police, not reporters, just a man in a dark blazer with kind eyes. "Ms. Martinez?" She hesitated, nodding slowly. "From Mr. Vance's office. He requests your presence. He said to tell you... It's about the child." Rosa stood frozen in the doorway. "Please," he added gently, "he's not angry." Still, she didn't speak. Didn't move. He said to tell you, he remembers? That changed something. She closed the door quietly and grabbed her coat. At the estate, Caleb waited near the garden where Aiden had last played before the accident. When Rosa arrived, she kept her head low, shoulders tense. You came, he said. I came because you mentioned the child. Caleb nodded. He keeps asking for the woman who saved him. Said you looked like someone he saw in a picture his mother kept. Rosa's eyes flickered, confused. Caleb continued. Her name was Evelyn, my wife. She used to mention you, said you had a fire in your spirit she couldn't stop admiring. Rosa blinked hard. I didn't know. Why? I didn't know either, not until yesterday. Silence stretched between them. You were framed, weren't you? He asked. Rosa's lips parted, but no words came out. He didn't need her to confirm it. I'm not here to demand explanations, Caleb said softly, but I owe you a thank you, and maybe more than that. Rosa looked up, eyes wet. You don't owe me anything, just keep him safe. I'd like to keep you safe too, Caleb said. She turned away. I'm not your problem, she said. You, he said, but maybe you're the solution to one I've ignored for too long. The gates opened slowly this time, not for a delivery van or a cleaning shift change, but for Rosa. She didn't wear her maid uniform today, just jeans, a worn blouse, and the same strength she'd carried for years. Her chin was up, but her stomach twisted as the mansion loomed into view. Inside, the marble floors reflected too much. Memories and accusations stuck in every corner. Rosa stepped through the foyer with guarded steps, feeling the gaze of security cameras she once avoided. But today, she wasn't here to clean. She was here because a man with power and a boy with nightmares had pulled her back. Caleb Vance waited for her in the sitting room. No tie, sleeves rolled to the elbows, like someone in control, but not comfortable. His expression was unreadable as she entered, standing instead of offering her a seat. Festus, I thought you left, he said. Not cold, but not warm either. I did, Rosa replied. You called. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. The silence between them stretched long until he finally spoke again. Blink number 2. She frowned. Do what? Jump into that river. Risk yourself for my son. She tilted her head. Because he was drowning? Caleb's jaw tightened. You didn't have to. You could have walked away. I could, Rosa said quietly, but then I wouldn't have slept that night. He studied her for a long moment. You don't act like someone trying to fix their reputation. Her eyes burned. You think that's what this is? Caleb folded his arms. Isn't it? She stepped forward. You're right. I could have let him drown. I could have watched your empire mourn another heir. But I didn't. Because no matter what your company did to me, what you did to me, I couldn't watch a child die. The air in the room changed. Charged, Caleb's voice dropped. So, this is about Vance Enterprises. You knew, Rosa said. You knew I was set up? Your lawyers crushed me like I didn't matter, and I kept quiet because survival doesn't allow for truth. I didn't know, he started. You benefited, she interrupted. You looked the other way while they erased me. A creak interrupted them. Aiden stood in the hallway, in pajama pants and socked feet, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Rosa, he ran straight to her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Are you staying? The boy asked, voice small and hopeful. Caleb's mouth parted, but he didn't speak. He watched as Rosa knelt, brushing Aiden's hair back gently. Only if your father says it's okay, she said softly. Caleb watched the moment unfold like a crack widening in everything he thought he knew. His son, who barely spoke to strangers, who recoiled from affection, had clung to her like she was his anchor. Stay, Caleb said suddenly, just until he's better. Rosa looked up. You don't trust me, he admitted, but he does. That's enough, for now. She rose slowly. I'll stay, but on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. No cameras, no interviews, no media circus. He nodded. That night, the mansion was quieter. Rosa settled into the guest room furthest from the staff quarters. Aiden slept soundly for once, his breathing even, his small hand still curled as if waiting for Rosa's. Caleb, in his private study, sat at his desk with a glass of scotch untouched. He opened a file, an archived Stanford debate, years old. A younger version of Rosalinda, stood at the podium, fierce, eloquent, fire in her eyes as she debated workplace ethics. He paused the video, staring at her frozen image. This wasn't just a maid. This was someone who once believed in the system, and the system had broken her. The next morning, Rosa rose early, just as she used to. But this time, she wasn't carrying a mop or cleaning supplies, only a quiet sense of purpose. Aiden was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, hugging a stuffed lion. When she stepped into the room, his face lit up. "Did you really come back?" he asked. "Beached her," Rosa said gently, smoothing the covers beside him. "But only if you promise to eat your breakfast this time." He giggled and nodded, the tension from the past few days easing in the warmth of routine. Downstairs, Caleb was waiting at the breakfast table. He watched his son laugh for the first time in weeks. Rosa didn't speak much, but her presence had already changed the air inside the house. The staff noticed it too. Whispers in the hallway, sidelong glances. Some remembered her. Others didn't know the truth yet, but everyone could feel something shifting. Later that afternoon, Rosa sat in the garden with Aiden. He drew in his sketchbook while she braided his hair gently, his little fingers smudged with colored pencil. Caleb stood by the balcony, watching from a distance, arms folded. When Rosa looked up, their eyes met. He approached slowly, sitting across from her. "Watched the video last night," he said without preamble. "Your debate at Stanford." She didn't flinch. "Then you saw who I used to be." He nodded. "You were brilliant. You still are." She turned to Aiden. "I was also naive. I thought truth would protect me." "Shiv," Caleb said quietly. "I don't know everything that happened, but I know enough now to say this. Someone in my company made sure your voice was—" Her fingers froze mid-braid. "The count and do what happened," he continued, "but I'm not going to let it stay buried. Not anymore." She asked, "Why believe me now?" "Because I've watched you with my son, and I've seen what guilt does to people. You don't wear guilt, Rosa. You carry grief and strength, and something I lost a long time ago." She looked at him, unsure whether to believe the sincerity in his voice. "I know you don't trust me," he added, "but Aiden does, and I want to learn why." Rosa stood, brushing the leaves from her skirt. "Trust isn't built in a day, Mr. Vance." "Call me Caleb," he said, rising too. She gave a small nod, then walked Aiden back inside. Caleb remained behind, the silence of the garden pressing around him like the weight of unspoken sins. That evening, Caleb met with his legal team. Behind closed doors, he asked them to reopen internal investigations, quietly, without press. He wanted to know who destroyed Rosalinda Esparza's future. And he wanted names. Back in her room, Rosa lay awake. Her eyes stared at the ceiling, her body still tense despite the luxury of the bed beneath her. She heard the wind against the windows and Aiden's soft breathing in the next room. The past was knocking at her door, louder now than ever, but this time she wasn't running. Tomorrow she would wake up not as Rosa the maid, not as Rosalinda, the ghost of a girl who once believed in justice, but as a woman determined to reclaim her truth. And maybe, just maybe, Caleb Vance, the man who once represented everything she lost, was starting to become something else entirely. And the mornings had changed. No longer scrubbing baseboards or sneaking out the back door, Rosa now entered the mansion through the front, an uneasy privilege granted not by status, but circumstance. Her footsteps echoed down the polished hallway as she made her way to the sunroom where Aiden sat cross-legged with papers, sketching galaxies on paper. When she entered, Aiden looked up, his face lighting up. "You came back," he said, running to hug her waist. And was silent. "I said I would," she smiled. running her fingers through his soft curls. "You doing okay?" He nodded, but didn't let go. "Sometimes I dream about Mama," he whispered. "She told me something before she—" Rosa bent down to meet his eyes. "What did she say, sweetheart?" Aiden's voice softened into a whisper. She said, "One day, you'll meet a woman who protects the weak. Her name is Rosalinda." He tilted his head. "That's your real name, isn't it?" Rosa froze. Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard, gently stroking his cheek. "Where did you hear that?" "I saw it. In her journal. She had a picture of you," he said, pointing to a wrinkled drawing he'd sketched, her eyes, gentle, watching over a crowd of people. Tears pressed against her lashes. She remembered it now. 3 years ago, a woman with sad eyes and a tired voice had walked into the legal aid clinic where Rosa was volunteering as a student. That woman had been Caleb's wife, Emma Vance. She had begged Rosa to help investigate workplace discrimination at one of Vance Corp's. Rosa had taken the case without hesitation. 2 weeks later, her ID was revoked. Her name splashed across headlines, her visa gone. Aiden touched her hand again. "Mama said, if I ever met her, I'd be safe." "I'm here now," Rosa whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." In his private office, Caleb Vance stared at the computer screen. Files he hadn't touched in years blinked back at him. HR complaints, audit reports, sealed settlements. It wasn't just an old scandal. It was a carefully orchestrated takedown. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. The more he dug, the more the rot showed. The name kept appearing, Gregory Blaine. Once head of compliance, now retired in Palm Springs, unreachable for years. Until today. Caleb made a call. The voice on the other end answered with surprise and a gruff, "Caleb Vance? What's this about?" "I need to talk. It's about Rosalinda Esparza." There was a long silence. Then Blaine replied, "You should come alone." Later that week, in a dusty cafe outside the city, Caleb sat across from the older man. Blaine looked thinner, slower, but not sorry. "She wasn't guilty," he said without preamble. "She found the reports. We were about to settle with the workers quietly, but her report made it up the chain, and that was dangerous. Someone needed a fall girl." "He framed her," Caleb said, rage low and trembling. Blaine stirred his tea. "I was told to. Orders from people higher than you or I." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And you let her vanish." "She disappeared. I figured she'd leave the country, but I heard rumors. Some said she stayed." Caleb left with the confession ringing in his ears. Rosalinda had spoken the truth. She was the truth, and they'd buried her alive. Meanwhile, Rosa stood in the frozen food aisle of a corner grocery, comparing prices of off-brand milk, when the manager's voice called out, "Excuse me, miss, I need to see some ID." She turned. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers. Panic flashed through her chest. She had no ID, no visa. Her breath caught. "You're under investigation for falsifying employment documents," one officer said. "Please come with us." Rosa didn't resist. She simply looked down, hugged her coat tighter around her, and allowed herself to be taken. Even as the flashing lights hit her face, her only thought was of Aiden's tearful little voice. "Mama said you'd protect me." And she was gone. The holding cell was cold and windowless. Rosa sat hunched on the steel bench, her arms wrapped around her knees as if she could curl herself into silence. This wasn't new. The cell didn't seem aged, reduced to a file number. But it never got easier. She didn't cry. Not when the officer fingerprinted her, not when she saw her name, Rosalinda Esparza, appear on the screen, in red, flagged. Outside, the story was already making its rounds. Tabloid sites and gossip blogs had headlines like "Billionaire's Maid" or "Mastermind," and "From River Savior to Fugitive, the truth about Rosalinda Esparza." Her face, snapped in poor lighting, looked guilty in every frame. Back at the mansion, Aiden screamed when he saw the footage. "Where is she?" he cried, lashing out at the TV. Caleb grabbed the remote, shut it off, and pulled Aiden into his arms. The boy pounded his chest, angry and terrified. "She didn't do anything," he sobbed. "Why do people hurt good ones?" Caleb held him tightly. He didn't have an answer. Caleb arrived at the station 30 minutes later, flanked by his lawyer and public relations chief. He strode through the lobby like a storm given legs. "I'm here for Rosalinda Esparza," he said to the desk sergeant. "Sir, she's being held under investigation. She's undocumented." "It's not invisible," Caleb snapped. "She's the woman who saved my son's life." Papers were signed, bonds were posted, and at last they brought Rosa out, her face pale, her wrists bruised from the tight cuffs. She stopped cold when she saw him. "I didn't ask for you to come," she said, her voice low and even. "You didn't have to." Rosa looked past him. Cameras were flashing outside the glass doors, reporters shouting her name. "How did they find me?" she asked, heart sinking. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Someone leaked your location, possibly from within the household staff. I'm handling it." "You don't want your help," she said. "I was safer in the shadows." He stepped closer, voice gentler. "You shouldn't have to live in shadows." "You think one act of kindness changes everything?" she asked. "I still have no name, no papers, no country." "You have my word," he said. "I'll fix this." But Rosa shook her head. "I'm not another thing for you to repair. I'm not your PR problem or redemption project. I'm a woman who's been surviving longer than you've been noticing." Her strength struck him like a thunderclap. He wanted to apologize, to take back years that couldn't be unwound. But instead, he simply said, "Let me help you stand in the light. That's all I ask." Rosa looked down, her hands trembled. "You still don't get it," she said softly. "You see a woman who fell. I see a woman who was pushed." The next morning, headlines shifted, not because Rosa spoke, but because Caleb did. He released a statement, not carefully curated by PR, but handwritten. "Seen my son. She was betrayed by my company. Her name is Rosalinda Esparza, and the world will hear it with respect from this day forward." He posted the original reports Rosalinda had submitted before they were shredded, altered, and weaponized against her. He named Gregory Blaine, offered a formal apology, and publicly declared he would fund legal counsel for every worker whose voice had been silenced in that same scandal. But Rosalinda stayed silent. Back in her tiny apartment, she stared at the open letter on her cracked phone screen. Aerosol called that evening. "You're not safe here anymore." "It was never safe," Rosa replied, "but now, I'm not invisible either." Her name was out now, no words were cursed, but spoken. Still, the wounds ran deep, and she wasn't sure if truth would be enough. But one thing had changed. She wouldn't run. Not again. The courthouse steps were lined with cameras, microphones, and a sea of murmurs. Inside, Rosa sat quietly in the hallway, her fingers pressed against the fabric of her skirt. Her heart pounded, not from fear of prison, but from the weight of reclaiming her name. She had been called many things: maid, undocumented, thief, ghost, but never her real name. Not Rosalinda Esparza. Across from her, Caleb Vance adjusted his tie, watching her in silence. He had brought his best legal team, experts in corporate litigation, immigration law, and defamation, but she had stunned them all when she told the court she would speak for herself. "My voice was stolen once," she told Caleb in the prep room earlier. "Let me use it now." The courtroom buzzed when she walked in, alone, without a suit or entourage, just herself. A woman, in simple clothes, walking to the defense table with the poise of someone who had survived fire. Judge Walters, an older man with creased lines of wisdom across his brow, looked over his glasses. "Esparza, are you sure you wish to speak today?" Rosa rose, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." And then, like water finding the cracks in stone, her story began to pour. She spoke of arriving in America as a scholarship law student, the dream stitched into every word her mother once whispered. She told the court how she had found troubling documents at Vance Enterprises, emails of unjust terminations, files that pointed to discrimination policies masked in algorithmic codes. She spoke of the meeting with HR, and how just days later she had been accused of embezzling funds she never touched. Her badge revoked, her dorm emptied. She recalled the cold holding cell and the silence of... "I was 22, she said, and the only thing louder than the judge's gavel was the silence of the people I trusted." The courtroom was frozen. No one shuffled papers or sipped from plastic cups. Even the stenographer hesitated with emotion. When she paused, Judge Walters looked at her carefully. "You were deported?" "She was scheduled to be," Rosa answered, "but a clerical delay bought me time. I ran, not because I was guilty, but because I was alone." She turned to the jury. "I didn't steal. I reported theft, and I paid for it with my name, my future, and my freedom." A hush fell. Even the opposing counsel didn't object. There was nothing to say. Step 1. Then it was Caleb's turn. He walked to the witness stand in his dark navy suit, posture controlled, voice composed, but his eyes, they betrayed emotion. Her eyes flashed defiance. "A quiet maid who saved my son's life with no hesitation." He paused, glancing toward her. "It wasn't until later I realized she was also the woman whose name was buried under my company's lies." The prosecution rose. "Mr. Vance, are you saying your company knowingly framed Miss Esparza?" Olivia replied. "I'm saying the men who did are gone. I'm here now, and I believe her." He looked at the judge. "She saved my son. She saved me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The final argument was hers alone. Rosa stood once more, walking to the center of the courtroom, her steps measured, her voice unwavering. "I was born Rosalinda Esparza," she began, eyes scanning every face in the room. "That name was taken from me in a single moment, with forged documents and lies that no one cared to question." She paused, placing her hand over her heart. "Bite. I never stopped being her. I never stopped fighting like her. Even when I swept floors under a fake name. Even when I went to sleep hungry so my neighbor's children could eat. Even when I rescued a boy from drowning, knowing the truth might drown me." She turned slightly toward Caleb, her expression soft but resolute. "Do you ask why I didn't run again? Because this time I wasn't saving myself. I was saving my story." Rosa faced the judge, voice catching only slightly now. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not to beg for mercy, but to reclaim the dignity stolen from me. This courtroom gave me something I haven't had in years. Years that listened. That's all I ever wanted." The courtroom fell silent again. A breathless, electric quiet. Judge Walters leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Esparza, thank you." After a brief recess, the judge returned with the verdict. Rosa stood, shoulders straight, even as her palms trembled at her sides. "The matter of defamation and wrongful identification," the judge said slowly. "This court finds the plaintiff, Rosalinda Esparza, not only innocent but grievously wronged. All charges are dropped. Her legal identity is fully restored." Rosa didn't move. The words had landed, but her body hadn't caught up. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court recommends an investigation into the misconduct by former Vance executives. Miss Esparza, you are not just cleared, you are vindicated." The room erupted. Reporters scrambled. Whispers became applause in the hallway. But in the middle of it all, Rosa stood, still a small pair of arms wrapped around her waist. "Mama?" Aiden's voice rang out as he darted through the aisle, tears in his eyes, hair tousled, cheeks flushed with joy. Rosa crouched down, gathering him into her arms, holding him as though nothing else mattered. Behind them, Caleb approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You did it," he said, voice low. Rosa whispered, rising to her feet. "We did." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who once stood atop an empire that nearly destroyed her, but the one who had handed her the mic, who had chosen truth over silence. Reporters snapped photos as the three of them exited together, but Caleb leaned close and said, "No more hiding." Rosa nodded. "No more shadows." Outside the courthouse, a woman handed Rosa a small bouquet. "For standing up," she said simply. Another handed her a small card. "Your story gave me hope." For the first time in years, Rosa looked at the sun and didn't flinch. She was Rosalinda Esparza again, not just in name, but in the strength she had fought to reclaim. And this was only the beginning. The morning air was quiet as Rosalinda stood outside the courthouse, a certified document trembling in her hand. For the first time in years, her name, Rosalinda Esparza, was real again. Restored, official, not scribbled on forged IDs or whispered in fear, but etched in legal record, sealed by the very justice system that once betrayed her. She felt both weightless and anchored, like every cell in her body remembered who she used to be. Caleb Vance waited beside her SUV, arms folded, face unreadable. When Rosalinda approached, he opened the door for her silently. She hesitated. "You don't have to," she said, still unsure how to navigate this new terrain between them. "I'm not your boss anymore," he replied quietly. "You're not my employee. I wanted to give you a ride, if you'd let me." She climbed in. They didn't speak for most of the drive, but the silence didn't bite. It settled. Somewhere between them, the storm had passed. Back at the estate, she was surprised to find Aidan waiting at the steps with a piece of paper in hand. His face lit up the moment he saw her. "Rosalinda," he shouted. The name sounded strange from his lips, yet so tender. "I made something for you." He held up a drawing. A simple house, flowers in the yard, a tree. But at the top, written in bright red crayon, "Our home." Rosalinda. Her eyes welled up before she could stop them. Fatty remembered how. He nodded. "I wanted to. It's your real name. Daddy said it's a strong name." She hugged him tightly, overcome by the purity of a child's acceptance. Inside the estate, Caleb handed her a sealed envelope. "Found this in one of Evelyn's old journals," he said. "She wrote it the night before her final surgery." Rosalinda sat down, heart hammering. Caleb gave her space as she opened it. "Did you find Rosalinda again? Thank her for me. She stood up when no one else did. She protected people like I should have. She made me believe in better." Her breath caught. A wave of guilt, pain, love, and something else "She never told me," Caleb said, sitting across from her. "About you. About what really happened. I think she didn't want me to feel the shame until I was ready to do something with it." Rosalinda folded the letter gently, fingers brushing the edges like it was holy. Her voice trembled. "I don't know who I am anymore, Caleb. I've lived under another name so long that part of me is buried deep." He looked at her, eyes clear. "Then let's dig her up, piece by piece, not for me, not for the press, for you." She nodded slowly, eyes still damp. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Not for charity, not for debt, for me." Caleb smiled for the first time in days. "Welcome home, Rosalinda." The next morning, the sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of the guest room that no longer felt like a cage, but a space she had chosen. Rosalinda stood at the window, holding a warm mug of chamomile tea. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned after years of being hunted by whispers, shadows, and memories. Her phone buzzed, a message from the American Justice Foundation. "We would be honored if Ms. Rosalinda Esparza would speak at our next university forum on legal ethics and social justice." She stared at the message, her name again, Ms. Rosalinda Esparza. It no longer hurt to read it. She pressed her palm against her chest. There was still ache there, but now there was also breath. Later that day, she met with Aidan in the garden. He was helping one of the staff plant new lilies under the oak tree. "You like flowers?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He shrugged. "Mom liked them. She said lilies are brave because they bloom even when no one's watching." Rosalinda blinked fast. "Your mom was right." He turned to her. "Do you like being called Rosalinda again?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I do. It's the name I was born with. I buried it because I thought I had to, but it never stopped being mine." He smiled. "I like it better than Rosa." That night, after dinner, Caleb invited her into the study. A fire flickered in the hearth, casting golden shadows across the room. On the desk was a small wrapped box and an envelope with her name. A head of braids for the house. It's not flashy, but I thought, maybe it's time you held something that's yours. She unwrapped the box. Inside was a nameplate, Rosalinda Esparza, advocate for justice. She touched the engraving with trembling fingers. You really think I can do this? I know you can, he said. You defended yourself when the world wouldn't. You stood for truth when everyone else chose silence. That's justice. Rosalinda looked up, voice soft. I'm still learning how to live without hiding. You're not alone anymore. There was silence. Then she smiled, small, sure, and for once free of fear. Weeks passed. Rosalinda moved into a modest townhouse near the Vance estate. It was hers, paid for by the foundation in recognition of wrongful prosecution. Not charity, but compensation. She decorated it with color and plants, her way of reclaiming space in the world. She spent her days speaking to students, mentoring young immigrants, and helping launch a local program that taught legal literacy to underprivileged communities. She was no longer running from her past, she was building a future from its rubble. One evening, she hosted a dinner at her new home. Caleb and Aiden arrived with a tray of empanadas and a handmade Welcome Rosalinda banner. The table was full of laughter and stories of broken people who had chosen healing over bitterness. After dessert, Aiden slipped away and returned holding a small envelope. "You," he said, shyly. Rosalinda opened it. Inside was a card drawn in crayon, a house, flowers, and 3 stick figures, her, Aiden, and Caleb. On the top it read, "To Rosalinda Maddox." Her breath caught. She looked at Caleb. His voice was gentle. "It fits." She looked down at Aiden, who leaned into her. "Is it okay if I call you Mom now?" Tears filled her eyes. "Only if I can call you my son?" As they embraced, the mural on the wall behind them caught the light, painted by local youth in her new center. It read, "Survival is strength, love is legacy." And beneath it, in quiet, bold letters, Rosalinda Esparza. The morning didn't begin with fanfare, but with a knock, steady, quiet, deliberate. Rosalinda opened the door to find Caleb standing there, his expression solemn, his hand holding something wrapped in linen. He looked nothing like the tycoon the world knew. His shirt was wrinkled, collar open, eyes lined with sleepless honesty. "I don't have a ring," he said softly, unfolding the linen, "but I have this." Inside was a deed. Not to a house, not to stock, but to a building. The Esparza Justice Center, a nonprofit legal aid foundation to be opened in her name, run under her vision. Her breath caught. Her name, Rosalinda Esparza, printed in bold across the top. Beneath it, founder and executive director. "You're giving this to me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Tipping it?" Caleb replied. "I'm acknowledging what was always yours, your name, your purpose. I just helped bring it to light." She blinked fast, her heart racing. "You want to propose? With a building?" He chuckled, a warm sound. "With what it means, it's not a reward, it's a beginning." From behind her, Aiden peeked out from the kitchen, clutching a fistful of dandelions. "Say yes," he whispered, eyes wide and hopeful. Rosalinda turned back to Caleb. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it held the weight of every scar, every battle, every moment she had doubted herself. "Yes." Preparations were simple, by choice. No extravagance, no press, just a backyard ceremony under the lavender skies of early evening. Mauricio threw herself into the details, her excitement contagious. "You're not just getting married," she said. "You're reclaiming your story." Rosalinda's dress was handmade by a woman from the local co-op. A soft, ivory cotton gown with lace sleeves and a flowing hem. Her hair was braided with white jasmine, the same flowers that grew behind her grandmother's home in Guadalajara. Caleb waited beneath an arch made of driftwood and eucalyptus, his suit dark and simple. He looked like a man who had come full circle, not because of a company, but because of love. Aiden walked her down the aisle, his little feet determined, his grip on her hand firm. "You're the prettiest," he whispered, chin held high. "Like a queen." She smiled down at him, tears glimmering. "And you're my strongest knight." The ceremony was brief. No pomp, no exaggerated vows, just truth. Caleb's voice was strong but emotional. No more secrets, no more shadows, just light, just us. Rosalinda's voice cracked, but she didn't falter. "For years I was erased. I was hidden, but you saw me, not what I'd lost, what I still had. I say yes, not because I need saving, but because I've finally come home." Their kiss was not thunderous, it was soft, healing, a moment stitched together with silent promises and steady hands. Marisol clapped through her tears, dabbing her eyes. "You didn't just survive, amiga, you rose." As twilight fell, the garden lit up with strings of warm golden lights. The scent of rosemary and jasmine mingled in the air. Tables were decorated with hand-stitched runners, flowers from the shelter garden, and meals prepared by women whose stories mirrored hers. Aiden spun in the grass, barefoot and free. He danced with no rhythm, no shape, only joy. Caleb held out his hand to her. "Dance with me." Rosalinda hesitated. "It's been a long time." He smiled. "Then let's make this your first one back." She placed her hand in his, and under the soft lights and wide-open sky, they began to sway. The music drifted through the air, gentle, acoustic, played by a local trio from the shelter's weekend group. Rosalinda moved with Caleb, uncertain at first, her body remembering something softer, something freer than survival. His hand stayed respectfully at the small of her back, his other hand cradling hers as if she might vanish if he let go. "You never danced like this with anyone else?" Caleb asked quietly, as they moved in slow circles. "Since I left school," she admitted. "Back then, everything felt—" He looked at her, his eyes shadowed but warm. "It is again." All around them, the world had grown quiet. The guests, mostly women from the community and friends from the co-op, gave them space. Aiden was lying in the grass now, looking up at the stars, his small frame curled around a stuffed bear Caleb had once. Marisol approached the microphone and raised a glass. "To Rosalinda Esparza, for showing all of us that the past doesn't get the final word." There was a cheer, modest but powerful. Rosalinda looked down, hands shaking. She had waited so long to hear her name spoken without fear. Caleb led her to the garden bench that had been built just days before. On the back, engraved in delicate script, were the words, "For those who once hid, but now rise." Her fingers traced the metal, and her breath caught in her throat. "I was afraid to believe this was real," she whispered. "Because you built it. I just finally saw it." She looked at him, vulnerability flashing behind her eyes. "Do you regret it? All of it?" He exhaled. "I regret not seeing you sooner, not seeing it when you were buried alive. But I don't regret now, and I won't regret tomorrow." In the distance, Aiden yawned, stretching out under the canopy of stars. Caleb moved to gather him, but Rosalinda gently shook her head. "Let him stay. He's never had this kind of peace." She sat beside the boy, covering him with her shawl, brushing a kiss to his forehead. Caleb watched her, his heart fuller than he'd thought possible. Later that night, after the last song had played and the candles had burned low, Rosalinda found herself standing before the nonprofit center Caleb had gifted her. The building was still under renovation, but its walls already whispered hope. Inside, the main wall bore a mural still in progress, painted by a local artist who'd once been a shelter resident. At the center of it was a faceless woman with outstretched hands, and behind her, the silhouettes of other women rising. She touched the rough brushstrokes and felt something shift deep inside. Her voice, stolen for so long, had found its echo here. Caleb appeared behind her, silent for a moment. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "For the first time in years, I think I am." He stepped closer, holding out a small box. Inside wasn't a ring, but a folded letter. "You should have this too. I found it in my wife's belongings the week Aiden was born." Rosalinda unfolded it. The handwriting was delicate but familiar. If you ever find Rosalinda again, thank her for me. She gave me the courage to speak when I was drowning in silence. Tell her, her voice matters." Tears fell before she could stop them, not out of pain, but release. She looked up at Caleb. "You ready for the next chapter?" He smiled. "Only if we write it together." And beneath the quiet stars of a Los Angeles night, surrounded by redemption, legacy, and love, they began again. The front doors of the Rosalinda Justice Center swung open as sunlight flooded the entryway, illuminating the bronze plaque mounted beside the door. It read, "Justice for the Voiceless, founded by Rosalinda Esparza." Inside, the center buzzed with quiet energy. Legal interns scribbled notes, single mothers sipped coffee in the waiting area, and a woman nervously held a folder of evidence as she waited for her pro bono consultation. At the heart of it all stood Rosalinda, no longer hiding, no longer Rose. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she moved from room to room, greeting people by name, checking in on each case with a calm authority that radiated empathy and strength. Months had passed since the courtroom victory that restored her identity, and still, every time someone said her real name aloud, it struck a quiet chord in her chest. One of pride, not pain. In her office, a framed copy of the judge's ruling hung above her desk. Next to it, a child's crayon drawing, Aiden's, from the week they'd moved into their new home. In it, stick figures held hands in front of a house labeled Home. Above their heads were 3 names: Aiden, Daddy, and Mom. He called her that now, without hesitation, without confusion, and every time he did, her breath caught, because she had never imagined a life like this could be hers. Aiden was thriving in his new school. His nightmares had faded, his grades soared. He had joined a robotics club and often came home rambling excitedly about coding and circuits. Rosalinda had taken to helping with his math homework, sometimes laughing at how much she had forgotten, other times wondering if maybe she could go back to school herself one day. Caleb had stepped away from day-to-day operations at Vance Tech. After years of chasing innovation, he now ran an internal ethics program that trained young executives on corporate responsibility and transparency. He sat in the back of one of the center's workshops every week, quietly listening as his wife coached women on standing up to injustice. He was still learning, still unlearning too. One afternoon, as Rosalinda reviewed a grant proposal at her desk, a journalist entered. She had requested an interview weeks ago, and today, the cameras were already being set up outside. The reporter was respectful, prepared, and curious. "To say your story is a modern miracle," she began. "Wrongfully accused, undocumented, erased from the system, yet here you are, director, advocate, wife, mother. What do you say to those?" Rosalinda smiled gently, fingers laced in her lap. "I say that my name was once erased, my voice was silenced, but I never stopped being who I was. That's what people forget. When someone loses their place in the system, it doesn't mean they lose their worth. You just didn't see me. Now, I made sure others are seen." The journalist leaned in, eyes soft. "So, what does your name mean to you now?" Rosalinda glanced toward the window, where Aiden was helping plant a tree in the courtyard with Caleb beside him. She thought about everything that had brought her here. Every sleepless night in fear, every courtroom glare, every whispered slur, every kindness that cracked through the dark. She turned back, voice steady. "Once more isn't a symbol of what I lost. It's proof that I survived, that I built something when no one thought I could. That's what it means. It's not just mine anymore. It belongs to every woman who was told to shrink." The journalist nodded, clearly moved. "I think that's all I need," she whispered. Rosalinda smiled. "Good, then make sure they hear it." Later that afternoon, the community gathered in the courtyard behind the legal center. The new tree stood in the middle, its roots protected by a freshly turned bed of soil, its branches still small, but already reaching for the sky. Aiden, dressed in a blue button-up shirt and grass-stained sneakers, stood proudly next to the plaque they had just installed. He looked up at Rosalinda with wide, proud eyes, and she knelt beside him as he read the words aloud. In honor of the woman who chose to stand. The guests clapped softly. Among them were the first clients the center ever helped, Caleb's former board members turned donors, local officials, and dozens of women who had waited years for someone like Rosalinda to rise. Rosalinda rose to her feet and turned toward the crowd. Caleb joined her, gently slipping his hand into hers as she stepped forward. His presence was no longer one of power or control, but of quiet support, of standing beside, not in front. She took a breath. Months ago, I was still running, still hiding. Even after winning my case, I didn't know what it meant to stop surviving and start living. I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel like I belonged. She paused, eyes sweeping over the crowd, landing on Marisol, who was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Then I realized belonging isn't something the world hands you. It's something you build. With truth, with kindness, with people who see you fully and still stay. Aiden tugged gently at her sleeve. "Tell them what you told me," he whispered. She laughed softly. "Which part?" "One about the name." Rosalinda looked at him, then smiled at the crowd. "Right," she said, voice warmer now. "I used to think my name was something stolen, something stained. But today, I see it for what it really is." She held up a small metal card, the official certificate from the Department of Justice, restoring her full legal identity. "Is my name," she said. "Rosalinda Esparza, and soon, Rosalinda Vance. But not because I married into it, because I earned it, because I chose it." Caleb's eyes misted. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter, the same one his late wife had written. "Found this a week after we met again," he said quietly, voice trembling. "It was written long before she passed. In it, she said, 'If you ever find Rosalinda again, thank her for me. She changed lives, she changed mine. Don't let the world forget her name.'" Rosalinda pressed her hand to her heart, unable to speak for a moment. The crowd stood in silence, then erupted into warm, sustained applause. After the speeches, music played and laughter danced through the air like sunlight through leaves. Children ran around the tree, couples swayed gently to soft music, and inside the center, fresh pastries and coffee were served to anyone who wanted them, whether they were donors or struggling clients. Rosalinda sat on the bench beneath the tree as Aiden curled beside her. Caleb came over with 2 cups of cocoa and sat on her other side. He glanced down at the plaque again. "Rosalinda Vance," he said, softly but clearly. "That name fits." She turned to look at him, tears brimming but unfallen. "Shh," she whispered, "because I finally chose it. Not to be hidden behind, but to stand with, to lead with." He smiled. "Then, let's make sure the world never forgets it again." She nodded, pulling both of them close. Behind them, carved into stone above the door of the center, were the final words she had insisted on. "Survival is strength, love is legacy." And this time, she was living both.